Greetings to all our stakeholders that are focused on this Investor Day. Good morning to those of you that are not local to our region. Good evening to those of you who may also not be local. And of course, good afternoon to those that are in our local time zone. Today is all about, in my mind, people. And yes, we're going to be talking about ESG. We're going to be talking about our gold business, but a business is about the people. And from the very first slide, you will see that people are very, very important to our business. People, good people with a good strategy and good assets can really move mountains. And today you're going to have the chance to listen to our very engaged and professional senior managers in our business, and they will be doing most of the talking, and in fact will do most of the answering of questions. And I'm sure you will appreciate it as much as I do. The first section is about ESG and a bit about strategy. I spent quite a bit of time on strategy with our H1 results, but for those of you who were not present or did not have the opportunity to join us for that, I will go through it in a little bit more detail. There is a safe harbor statement in the presentation, and of course there are forward-looking statements and observations. Please take note of them. All right, if we can actually then move on to the first official slide, please. A tree, and our tree, the Sibanye tree, has received international acclaim, and a tree is a very, very important part of our business, a part of our thinking. In fact, it describes our ethos, and much of what you see in a tree is reflected in our business. A lot of what you don't see obvious in a tree, such as its roots, are also very, very important. And a lot of communication happens through the roots of trees. And when I describe the roots of our tree, you will also recognize why it's important for the roots to communicate with other trees, send signals, and they do send signals. In fact, I'm told from having recently read a book on trees that signals between trees move at 1/3 of an inch per second. So very slow, but nevertheless they communicate. The roots of our tree holds our values, and our values are commitment, accountability, respect, enabling, and safety. And that's a synonym for cares. And we talk about Sibanye cares. Now, as you start thinking about this tree, of course, it has a trunk and the people of our company. And as I said, you will recognize this constant theme about the importance of people, whether they are employees, whether they are stakeholders, such as our investors, organized labor, suppliers, all very, very important to us. But our employees provide the strength and direction of the tree to the canopy, obviously targeting sunlight so we can grow. And of course, to grow, we have to be profitable. And to be profitable, you in mining terms, you've got to talk about safe cost, quality, and volume. And if the profitability is there, we can develop that canopy of the tree. And again, the canopy of the tree contains things such as the environment, shareholders, communities, all our stakeholders, organized labor, and so on. And we've made it our business to understand what is superior value, which is our vision for our company, for each one of those stakeholders. And of course, the tree bears fruit when it's properly nourished and it's profitable. And for each one of those stakeholders, we recognize what are the fruits that come with superior value creation. So that is really our tree, and it's well understood in our company. If you visit our operations, you will see it well displayed. And as I say, this concept of stakeholder capitalism is well recognized, and certainly we are seen as a leader in this field. Our purpose, which is derived from the tree, and our ethos and thinking, our purpose is we believe our mining improves lives. And as I've already said, we do that by creating superior value for all our stakeholders, and that's the company's vision. And our strategic intent at this point in time is to strengthen our position as a leading international precious metals group. So that's our ethos. That is the way we think. It's not smoke and mirrors, and we use this very effectively. Next slide, please. As I said, our strategic intent is to strengthen our position as a leading international mining group by focusing on the 6 strategic focus areas that are contained within the pie. The one at the center is one we will be focusing on today, but it is also the central theme in terms of our strategic focus, and you can see that is about embedding ESG excellence as the way we do business. But other strategic focus areas, building a value-based culture, very important for safety, and of course for the overall success of the group. That is really led by Davy Mostert, who you will meet in the next presentation. Focusing on safe production and achieving operational excellence is a strategic focus area. I think we've done that particularly well. That area of our strategy is led by Dr. Richard Stewart, and he will also be introduced to you in the next session. Optimizing capital allocation, we're very disciplined. We have stuck to our capital allocation model, and I think that's well known and was discussed in detail at our H1 results. Prospering in South Africa's investment climate. The majority of our assets are in South Africa. It's a tough place to operate. We know how to do that well, and we know how to prosper. Building an operating portfolio of green and related technologies, green metals and related technologies, is a key strategic focus area, and I'm going to cover that in the next few slides as well. So that's how we move from the tree to proper strategy that is crystallized in focusing on these areas, and there's an executive responsible for each one of these areas. Thank you. So talking about value creation, and remember we said that our vision is to create superior value for all stakeholders, and we have done that particularly well, building off what was seen as unwanted gold assets. I will cover that in some in a bit of detail as I explain this sigmoid curve. We then entered the PGM business in South Africa, and we exposed the company to palladium, platinum, rhodium, iridium, ruthenium, and through our investment in DRD, tailings retreatment, specifically in the gold segment, but we also do a bit of PGM tailings retreatment in the South African segment. We then acquired the Stillwater operations in Montana, and that gave us exposure to PGM recycling and palladium, platinum, and rhodium in that region as well. More recently, we announced our intention to enter the battery metal space as our 4th sigmoid curve, and after significant due diligence, we announced our intention to obtain exposure to lithium, nickel, cobalt is a bit of a challenge, manganese, graphite. Of course, recycling is a green metal, irrespective of where it may come from. Uranium, the transition of PGMs into the hydrogen economy, we're well exposed to that. Copper is a common denominator, and of course, metals produced from tailings retreatment complement that. So the battery metal strategy together with the PGM strategy plus exposure to uranium, which I'm going to discuss in a bit more detail, has really crystallized our strategy, as you will see from the following slide, which is a puzzle that pulls it all together. So let's have a look at that. You can see the base of the puzzle is the PGMs, recycling, uranium, tailings retreatment with our investment in DRD Gold, and then of course the green energy metals. And I believe this is a unique combination of metals that positions our company extremely well for the future green energy environment. Thank you. As I said, I would just discuss uranium briefly. We did announce at H1 that we will be progressing our uranium strategy as well. Uranium has been identified, and it's always been a green energy metal. But I think as the world has become more sensitive to CO2 emissions, nuclear energy has emerged as an alternative zero carbon based generation option to complement renewable energy, which, as we know, is intermittent. There is growing commitment to nuclear energy, especially in the Asia Pacific region with 125 gigawatts of new nuclear capacity being planned. We expect the uranium market to move into deficits within about 5 years, and we expect long-term forecasts to exceed $60 per pound. We have very significant uranium resources. We have 27 million pounds of uranium, U3O8, 250 to 500 meters below surface at our Beatrix West section. We have 52 million pounds of U3O8 on our Cook tailings dams on the West Wits, and we have very significant uranium processing infrastructure both on the West Wits and at Nufcorp. So we have a significant asset base to build our uranium aspirations. Dennis Tucker will be leading this initiative. Dennis Tucker is on the call and will be available to answer questions. The diagram on the right-hand side of this slide really just shows you what is known as Beatrix number 4 shaft, or Beatrix West. It was originally the Biza uranium mine, which after the uranium price collapse in the 80s was turned into a gold mine. The subvertical shaft was sunk, and the Kalkoenkrans reef was accessed from the original Biza uranium shaft. The Biza reef, you can see, is in purple, and you can see it is initially a lot shallower than the Kalkoenkrans reef. You can also, on this diagram on the very right-hand side, see Beatrix 1, 2, and 3 shaft. And of course, if ever there was a need, we could deepen those shafts and access the Biza reef below it. But that's not in even the medium-term planning. We have very significant shallow resources of uranium that can be accessed very quickly. So uranium is moving from being unloved for the last decade, but it's now being recognized as a green metal that has a role to play in a decarbonized future. Thank you. There's a lot of debate around whether mining companies are just talking the talk around ESG. You will see from the following presentations that we've already moved on from talking about ESG to having a very crystal clear sustainability strategy, including the capacity and I'm talking about the management resources to continue driving that. And I'm going to discuss that in a little bit of detail in the bullet points below. But not only that, we as a group have moved to including ESG measures in our long-term incentives, and it really starts from a unitary board. We have a number of committees, and in fact, all of them, in a way, one way or another, have an input into ESG. But as you all know, the Social Ethics and Sustainability Committee is where the full responsibility for ensuring proper strategic implementation of ESG and sustainability is monitored by the board. So it starts with the board. In the C-suite, I have a strategic advisory office, and one of my strategic advisory senior managers is our sustainability executive. And Louisa, you will meet shortly, and Louisa, together with all of those that are focused on ESG, will be presenting this afternoon. The link into operations is done through the Chief Operating Officer, and the Chief Operating Officer's primary responsibility is to convert strategy into operational plans. So as I said right at the beginning, it starts with people, the right people, good professionals, well-qualified, competent people that are engaged, a strategy, and you're going to see the strategy, and I shared some of the strategy with you at our H1 results, and then of course the right assets, and of course the right incentives. And as I said at the beginning of this slide, our incentives are in place. There are a few companies that have ESG incentives in place. Most of them have overrides. So if you have an environmental issue, it's an override on an incentive. Ours has, we have an override as well in our short-term incentive, but in our long-term incentive scheme, 20% of it is now made up of very specific ESG measurements, and you can see the combination there, 30, 40, and 30. So embedding ESG excellence is not just a title, it's not just smoke and mirrors, it is a proper strategic thrust headed up by competent and professional people and embraced by all of us in the group as a core strategic thrust. Thank you. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Richard Stewart and Davy Mostert to talk to you about our initiatives on safety, health, and building a value-based culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A real pleasure today, I guess, to kick off the session with what is really our first, second, and third priority in Sibanye-Stillwater, which is the safety and health of our employees. I think traditionally when you talk mining and talk safety, very often your mind jumps straight to work-related injuries and accidents and statistics, but really our safety and health strategy is about so much more than that. It's ultimately about really the holistic well-being of our employees, and not only our employees, but also the communities in which they live. And of course, tackling work-related injuries and incidents is a key part of that. And we really do address our overall safety, or it's underpinned by a risk-based approach. But in addition, it does go to reducing the exposure of our employees to occupational related diseases, reducing exposure to dust, which obviously leads to silicosis, diesel particulate matter, radiation, platinum salts, etc. We do look at providing health services that enhance the overall quality of life of our employees, and of course work together with national strategies to try and manage and eradicate epidemics such as TB and HIV, and as we've seen this year, of course, COVID-19. Very difficult to eradicate ourselves, but certainly we try and manage that as far as we can within our own environments. And ultimately, we look to provide world-class emergency response services, and we subscribe to world-class safety practices and are currently in the process of registering or completing our accreditation of ISO 45001 across all of our operations. I think COVID in particular is certainly one we are very proud of how we've handled it, and this has been testament to our risk-based approach to dealing with health and safety. 18 months ago, when we were designing new operating protocols, there were no rules. We didn't yet know how this was going to end up. But through a risk-based approach, we've been able to continue operating throughout most of this pandemic with infection rates that are in many cases better, but certainly no worse than the surrounding communities and national average, or the communities in which we work, which is really testament to the fact that the risk-based approach and the work practices we put in place, has meant that our environment is certainly not a hotspot for COVID infection, something we're very proud of. I think in terms of vaccination as a company, we certainly believe that is the long-term sustainable solution to dealing with COVID. And in that regard, we've invested heavily in our vaccination rollout. We've invested almost 10 million rand in terms of setting up centres across our company, investing in cold chain storage. We currently have 4 primary vaccination sites and can roll out multiple satellite sites, of which 3 are operating right now. We vaccinated in excess of 50,000 of our employees, which is by far industry leading, and that represents over 60% of our total workforce. And in fact, more than 75% have registered to take up the vaccine, and our priority right now is ensuring that those individuals receive the vaccine, and through intensive education processes, we address any hesitancy regarding vaccination that may exist with the balance of our employees. We also took our first steps towards rolling out beyond just our own company on the 1st of September, where we now offer vaccination to dependents of our employees. And we're working closely with the Department of Health to further roll this out into our doorstep communities and truly contribute towards the overall national vaccination strategy. So just in terms of our safety journey, I think very evident that from the time Sibanye was born and we took over these assets from Goldfields, we made a notable difference in the overall safety trends and statistics. I think like much of the industry in South Africa, we recognized around 2017 that while we'd made some great strides in reducing fatalities, we had largely plateaued. And that led to the development of a new safety approach, engaging multiple stakeholders, and we started our safety culture journey. In 2018, we had 2 very unfortunate and tragic incidents, multiple fatal incidents at Driefontein, a seismic incident, and Kloof, where we had colleagues walk into an abandoned mining area. But that really created a platform to truly bring with us all stakeholders and re-engage on a new safety strategy and really re-energize the safety culture journey that we were undertaking. That led to world-class results in 2019. I think we broke industry records of 13 million fatality-free shifts. I dare say that was far ahead of what had ever been achieved before, and is testament to the fact that this strategy worked. Fundamentally, the strategy is about teams looking after each other. So it's based on team dynamics and looking after the safety of your colleagues, of your friends, of your team members, of brothers. And what happened with COVID is those team dynamics were disrupted. And as such, we've unfortunately seen a regression in the last 18 months, which we are in the process of addressing. And a regression that, again, sadly, has been seen across much of the industry, and one that we do need to arrest and bring back. Very pleasing with the initiatives we've outlined during 2021. We have seen a significant improvement over the year, and certainly the last quarter in particular has been very pleasing, and we look forward to that trend continuing. If we look at the total injury frequency rate, and this is really the measure that we compare ourselves against with our international peers, since Sibanye started, we've managed to almost halve the total number of injuries we see in our gold operations. And what we really look forward to is when we have a strategy over the next 4 or 5 years to halve that number again. And if we're successful in that, that will bring us down to injury frequency rates that is in line with our best performing international peers, and certainly part of our strategy we look forward to delivering on. So how do we rank relative to our peers? Well, certainly if we compare ourselves to our South African or other ultra-deep mining peers, we rank very well. but we fully recognize that we are an international company. We do measure ourselves against best practice. And if we're going to be an international mining company, then we need to benchmark ourselves against our international peers, irrespective of the number of employees or operating environment that we are in. And that is certainly part of our strategy, strives towards benchmarking ourselves and competing with the best practice of our international peers. The way we expect to achieve this is through our zero harm strategic framework, which we'll unpack in the next few slides. As with so many things in our company, it's underpinned by our values and our engaged leadership, which Dawie will share a bit more details on. But fundamentally, that is the long-term sustainable solution to safety, where we have employees making the right decisions all of the time, undertaking the right behaviors all of the time, that's pinned on our values. We have three core pillars that look to address our safety strategy and enabling environment, which really goes around removing hazards or eliminating hazards. It's engineering out risks, having the right tools and equipment, designing the right operating protocols and practices, or having those in place. It goes around empowered people. That is where the risk management of the business really comes in. You can eliminate the hazards through engineering them out, but the residual risks need to be managed by people. And this is about having appropriately trained, competent and resourced people in the right places to execute our strategy, and then embedding that strategy into the way we do business on a daily basis through appropriate systems. But with that, perhaps I can hand over to Dawie. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And as Richard has alluded to the fact that we have commenced with this program some time ago. This is not a campaign. This is really a detailed program where we look at context and we design with some really appropriate solutions that are very specific per segment and per operating area. So if I can start, we operate really in complex times that we've seen with COVID and the disruptions that were caused, and the impact of the environment on people and leaders in particular, and operating teams. We live in a world that is really unpredictable and ever-changing. We call it the VUCA world, a world that is full of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's within this context where we need to get our leaders to be functional and our operating teams to take the right decisions. So where the focus is really in terms of three areas. One is in terms of a values-based culture where the design is top-down and bottom-up. So we work at the top of the organization, starting with the executive, going to all of the management structures, and we impact in terms of what we term team mechanics and team dynamics. The team mechanics sessions are really focused on role clarity and goal and value alignment, where we really look at what are those outcomes and how do we ensure that teams are functional. The team dynamic sessions focus more on what is always termed the softer side, the behavioral side, the team cohesion side, and how we ensure that teams connect and people have a shared vision and a shared purpose. Leaders are the second important aspect and critical because leaders impact culture. If we can quote some statistics, it's said that leaders have a 72% impact on culture, and culture a 24% impact on the bottom line. So what we do is we have a leadership competency framework where we develop all our leaders from the executive right down to the supervisors. And they're really focused on 5 key building blocks, being managing self, managing teams, the context, movement, and relationships. And it's with that in mind that we then build our teams. So if you impact on future-ready leaders, leaders that will develop a future-fit organization operating within this increasing complexity and based on a value set and a value system where our values are shared and the understanding in terms of the behaviors is a shared understanding, the outcome is really engaged employees, and it is really focused on safe production. If we can move to the next slide, I'll talk to what the impact is at the bottom. So this is typically what we do with our operating teams. This is where the techie hits the tar. So we start with our teams on a 2 to 3 day program, and each of these teams start with their story, where they come from, what are the issues that they need to deal with, and they really look at the key aspects that will make the team successful. The second step is really understanding what are those key values and how to get the values, the behaviors aligned to the values that we would want the team to underpin. We work with team in terms of development. They present their charter, and there's a lot of buy-in that happens between the shift supervisors, the mine overseers, and these teams. The third aspect is really making it real in their context, and that is where we introduce what is termed the Mhlangano process, or on the platinum side is called the Tswela process. And the process is really making sure that the team takes ownership for problem solving. They take ownership for hazard identification and for risk management. And we ensure that at the end of the day, this is systemized and that the team will take control of their future journey. It's a process that is well received, and we have probably to date taken approximately 30 to 40% of our teams through this structure. With this in mind, I'll hand back to Richard. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Dawie. And just to shoot through the balance of our strategy on a very high level, as indicated, the 3 pillars, the first one was around an enabled environment, which fundamentally went to eliminating risks and hazards. One of the ways that we tackle that is through a leading indicator analysis, which is really a process of trying to identify unwanted events, hazards, high risks, before they necessarily lead to incidents or accidents, and trying to proactively manage those. This slide provides some of the leading indicator themes that we've specifically identified and been working on this year, such as around rock mass management, which talks directly to fall of grounds, winches and rigging, mobile machinery, and of course rail-bound equipment. And through that, you can see several initiatives we've undertaken which really go to engineering out the problem as far as possible, such as through vehicle-to-person proximity detection devices, many of which are complex and being trialed for the first time in some of our operations. And on our trackless equipment, for example, the level 9 rollout, as it is known, where we are leading in terms of having rolled out vehicle-to-person proximity detection systems across all of our operations. Many of this revolves around technologies and new learning, such as our seismic roadmap, which is currently being developed, and the application of existing technologies for understanding rock mass behavior ahead of our current mining phases. The second part of our pillar was around risk reduction, was around risk management and empowered people, and specifically what that goes to again is train people, but being able to implement our operating practices and processes in a way that we can manage our risk. That starts off with the fundamental risks we have we call them our rules of life, which is an initiative we rolled out this year. And that really goes to address the highest energy incidents we can have, which can result in serious injuries and fatals. On top of those fundamental rules, we build the rest of our risk management system as we move through critical controls, as we move through group minimum standards. And we do this with many international partners. A good example of that is the IMS Hub, who help us take these operating policies and practices, which, as you can imagine, can be written in the Queen's English and the best technical language. But how do you implement that underground? And working with our partners here, we look at ways of taking those operating practices into simple, visualized safety systems, such that they can be well understood and easily implemented in the operating environment. And finally, if we move on to our last pillar, which is about our systems and appropriate systems in terms of embedding our operating practices. One of the key areas we've been working on over the last few months is around building a significant digital platform. This really goes to utilizing large databases and large sets of information to proactively manage safety, risk management. We have several initiatives, I think, that are leading in terms of, for example, being able to monitor data on rail-bound equipment, and through being able to monitor that data, not only understand the operations of that particular piece of equipment, but also how it's being operated, and therefore the behavior of operators, and identify any risks that may exist with that equipment, and therefore try and address it prior to an incident being undertaken. This is what feeds into our leading indicator analysis, and certainly is a large part of proactively managing safety. We do subscribe, as mentioned previously, to international best practices and are in the process of receiving ISO 45001 accreditation across our systems. And then we have several other systems which we've implemented across our business, which help us to implement, to measure, to monitor, and continuously improve the various practices that we have on a continuous learning basis. But I hope, thank you very much. I hope this is shared with you, at least on a very high level, our approach to safety, which, as I mentioned, is certainly a holistic one to overall well-being of all of our employees and the communities in which we operate. But with that, I'd like to hand back to James, and would be happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you very much.